Now a news conference on a federal plan to buy back guns in 85 cities throughout the country. Housing and Urban Development Secretary Andrew Cuomo spoke about the program today. Atlanta Mayor Bill Campbell and Toledo Mayor Carlton Finkbeiner also took part in the event. It's about 45 minutes.
Good evening. Welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of the Kanawha Valley. I'm Jack Hickok, a member of the fellowship. Before we begin our formal program, I need to make some announcements. Since our speaker has to catch a plane shortly, we will give him the bulk of the time between now and 7 p.m. Following his prepared remarks, he may have time for a few questions. I'll then introduce any candidates who are present, and if you are a candidate and have not done so, please sign up. There's a sheet out on a table out on the porch so that we'll know to introduce you. Just off the porch and inside the building is the web room where some of you found some refreshments before the beginning of this program. Following departure of Mr. Nader and his party, the candidates or the representatives should feel free to distribute literature and to collar anyone who looks interested. There will also be some certified representatives of candidates who are petitioning to get on the ballot, including Mr. Nader for president. So if you'd like to sign those petitions, they will be there for you afterward. You'll also find coffee, hot water for tea, and some other refreshments. You can find the restrooms by going through either set of double doors, and there, if you go out to the left, it's down the long hallway. If you go out through the right, you go through the web room, and you'll see it back in the corner next to the kitchen. If there are no other announcements, I'm pleased now to introduce the regional coordinator for the Virginias for Nader 2000, Ms. Jana Cutlip, who will have some additional introductions.
Oh dear. I hope I'm going to be able to be seen over all these microphones. I want to welcome you all to coming tonight. I want to thank you all for coming and welcome you all and welcome all the viewers from C-SPAN. And I especially want to thank C-SPAN for coming to cover this very important event. This is a call to action for people to become active participants in our democracy. And I'm the regional coordinator for Nader 2000 for West Virginia and Virginia. And there are petition drives happening throughout the country. Right now we have Nader on the ballot in 14 states and the District of Columbia. And we still have 36 states to get him on the ballot in. And it's going to take all of our efforts in order for that to happen. And I just want to give you a little bit of background. I first learned about Ralph Nader when I was a child, and it changed my life. Seeing his example of people being involved citizens who could have a direct impact on creating a better society is something that I very much responded to, and it has certainly flavored my entire life. And I think probably many of you in this room as well, and certainly many of the C-SPAN viewers. So what we need is we need all of the people who respond to what they hear tonight, what Mr. Nader's remarks, and who then will go to the website, votenader.com, and see the history and the background and the platforms. And on the website, you can get directly connected to the coordinators for your state. And in some states, like West Virginia, which is the most wired state in the country, which I'm very proud of, you can actually download the petition forms and the credential forms and the instructions directly from votenader.com. And in other states, you can't do that just quite yet, but they can put you directly in contact with the coordinator for the other states. And I think that it's very important that right now we have an opportunity to create a new paradigm for the new millennium. And if everybody who responds, who feels in their heart of hearts that Mr. Nader would be the best president to start the new millennium, and they will go and become participants in our democracy by petitioning in their own states, and especially in West Virginia, then Ralph can win. And if he wins, we all win. So right now I'd like to introduce to you David Grubb. He's a former state senator in West Virginia, and he's one of the original Nader's Raiders, and he's the founder of Citizen Action Group in West Virginia. Please give him a warm welcome.
Thank you very much. Did you ever say to yourself just once, wouldn't it be nice to have somebody running for president that we could vote for and truly believe in? Have no reservations about voting for? Did you ever say that? Someone who could instantly restore our faith in the office of presidency, who could instantly restore our faith in the concept of government. Did you ever say that? I have. And I have the pleasure of introducing the one individual, perhaps the only individual that I can think of that could accomplish those feats overnight. Probably the easiest introduction that I've ever had to make. I get to introduce a living legend. I get to introduce someone from my heart, the individual who probably has had the greatest effect on my adult professional career than any other individual. And to me, it seems like not so long ago. Turns out it's a little over 30 years ago. I was in college, and I knew what I wanted to do when I grew up. There was no doubt in my mind. Well, the first thing I wanted to be like Mike, although there wasn't a Michael Jordan then, there was Jerry West, and I wanted to be like Jerry. I wanted to be a professional basketball player. The problem was, and it was a small problem, it took me a long time to recognize how big the problem was, is that I wasn't quite tall enough, I wasn't quite quick enough, I didn't quite have the talent to play professional basketball. So I decided, well, there's got to be other things. I decided I was going to be a doctor. I was in pre-med, I was in the benzene ring, I was a chemistry major, I was all set to go to med school. And then something happened. I met an individual who said, those are really worthwhile career goals. And we need good doctors. We need dedicated doctors. But you know something? We also need public citizens. What the heck is that? I've never heard of this term, public citizens. We need people who are willing to spend a little time. You know, maybe take off from their career goals, spend a few weeks, a few months, maybe a year working on important issues. And guess what? Coincidentally, he had a perfect project for me to work on. Clean water. We're starting this new project, Campaign Clean Water. And if you come and work, you'll be able to do something good in the next 6 months or year. Then you can get back to your career goals. You can do something good. Well, during that 6 months, and it was appealing to me, I said, that's wonderful. I want to do that. I can do something good. Take off a year, then go to med school, right? During that period of time, we had a number of conversations. Little comments were drifted into those conversations like, you know, one of the problems in society is we have an awful lot of people who like to be 100-yard dash people. They like to sprint out very fast, and then they get to the end of the finish line, and the race is over. What we really need are people that are marathoners. We need people who will make lifetime commitments, who will run the race all the time at a steady pace, never give up. I also said things like, you know, Dave, to me, work is more than a career. Work is really two things, two words. Work is achieving justice. And you've done a good job here the last 6 months or a year, and I think we'd like to have you stay on. Would you consider making that kind of commitment? Pretty soon I was in front of the altar committing my life to the public interest. And I knew from that point on that no matter what I did in my life, part of that work was going to be public interest work. And those kinds of commitments, I mean, if it was just me, it would be a powerful and poignant story. The impact one person can have over another person. But it wasn't just me. Thousands of people An entire generation and a new generation now are being affected by this same individual's model, his example. You know, when I think back over those years, and I think back over those early days, we all had a lot of expectations about what would happen and what could happen. The remarkable thing is how many of them have happened. How many good things have happened because of that movement, because of the people that were inspired to take on challenges they would never have taken on before. And now I have the pleasure and the privilege of introducing to you the man who did change my life, who established that role model of a public citizen, who has really forever changed the political landscape in this country, who proved that you could take on City Hall and win. You could take on General Motors and win. Who provided examples like this book, Action for a Change. I still have my original copy. This book was our Bible for years. We carried it with us wherever we went. It was the manual for citizen organizing and citizen action, and a public citizens action manual, the really cookbook for forming citizen action groups in this country. Those kinds of things are what this individual has meant to our country. A man who has taught us that if we are ever going to have daily democracy, we must have daily citizenship. The father of the American consumer movement. The man who continues to work every single day at accomplishing those two words, achieving justice. And the man who inspires me still to this day to say that when I grow up, I want to be like Ralph. And now I get to deliver the line that I have been waiting my whole life to deliver. Ladies and gentlemen, the next President of the United States, Ralph Nader.
Thank you. Thank you very much, David Grubb, who's really a public citizen here of great achievement in West Virginia, and the best is still ahead for David's contributions. For over 35 years, I have been involved with many good people trying to improve our country, trying to advance justice in our country. We have achieved a number of victories. We've made motor vehicles safer and helped save hundreds of thousands of American lives. We've moved to establish stronger food safety standards and air and water pollution standards by our impact on Congress and on the White House throughout the years. We've helped open up government through the enactment of the strongest Freedom of Information Act in the U.S. country, in all over the world. And we've done a number of things that have helped establish citizen, consumer, environmental, student action groups all over the United States. Because our philosophy is the purpose of leadership is to produce more leaders, not more followers. And we hope we've done a good deal of that. But the doors of democracy have been closing on the American people in recent years, as the two parties, Republican and Democrat, have converged to essentially, on more and more issues, become one corporate party with two heads wearing different makeup. Our government in Washington has been turned against its own people repeatedly in area after area that matters to global corporations. And the corporate government, with its thousands of lobbyists, its thousands of political action committee slush funds going into corporate politicians' campaigns, our political government has been hijacked by the global corporate powers that are swarming over Washington, D.C. And so citizen groups really can't get much done anymore. All they ask for, whether they're conservative, liberal, progressive, whatever label they put on themselves, is to have a chance to further their ideas for a better America. But King Corporation rules in Washington, D.C. We have a government of the Exxons, by the General Motors, for the DuPonts, not a government of, by, and for the people. And as Thomas Jefferson taught us many decades ago, when the political system becomes oppressive, exclusionary, and a servant of the moneyed interests, which is what he called it in those days, today it's the corporate interest, the citizens have got to move in, roll up their sleeves, and create a new political system and a new political party in America. And that party is the Green Party all over the country. We hope in this campaign, as we campaign in every state, the only candidate who will campaign in all 50 states will be on all 50 state ballots, will encourage thousands of Americans who have been disillusioned or disgusted with crooked politics to move into the progressive political arena, to clean up politics, to return government to the people, not just by saying it, but by working, by actually spending more time throughout the week and the month in civic engagement in this matter. The way we're running is important. We are not taking any political action committee money. We want to abolish political action committees. We want to have... We believe that public campaigns, public election campaigns, are like public schools and public parks. They should be funded with public dollars, the best investment Americans can ever make. If they fund campaigns for a few $100 million, they will save billions of dollars, tens of billions of dollars of their tax dollars that are now funneled through Washington into the coffers and treasuries of all kinds of major corporations, into stadiums for these big sports complexes instead of into schools and clinics back home, into huge international agribusiness corporations that are squeezing our farmers' livelihood so that small farmers and small ranchers can't make a living anymore. No matter how many hours they work from dawn to dusk, their price for their food and other food products is being squeezed by the Cargills and the Continental Grains and the international beef packers and the giant chicken processors and ADM. We want to make sure that people's tax dollars are used for serious matters affecting all the people. People's tax dollars should be used to repair our public works, our bridges, our public transit systems that either don't exist or are decrepit, our schools that are crumbling in disrepair, our health clinics about which we need more and better equipped such clinics. We need to improve our drinking water systems. Instead, your tax dollars are going in the hundreds of billions of dollars at the local, state, and federal level into the pockets of these giant international corporations, from General Electric to the big pharmaceutical drug companies, to all kinds of corporations who have no more allegiance to this country, who transcend the world, cutting deals with dictatorships, using our tax dollars to subsidize their military weapons sales abroad, using our tax dollars through the IMF and World Bank to develop giant, unworkable economic projects in the third world that are devastating the environment, increasing land erosion, destroying forests, contaminating water, and just making the oligarchs and dictators in those countries ever richer. I think it's important here in West Virginia to focus on the way King Coal has ravaged this state for over a century and a half. We have worked with Ken Heckler, who's your Secretary of State, back when he was a member of Congress, to get through the coal mine health and safety law and the coal mine pneumoconiosis compensation law. And we're up against the big coal companies, the big steel companies, and their lobbyists. And it was quite a struggle in the late 60s. These were the days when the coal companies denied that there was such a thing as black lung disease. They said the miners were dying from asthma and from smoking. They weren't dying from the particulates of the coal mines that were shredding their lungs. Even though in Britain, this disease was documented in the 1930s and workers were compensated for it. I remember standing before the Senate committee with Senator Jennings Randolph from West Virginia, who also didn't think it was a serious problem, although he changed his mind quite dramatically later. And we brought in some coal miners who had coal miners' black lung disease in the advanced stages. And the doctor who accompanied them had them stand up in front of the senators and say, this is what black lung disease does to a coal miner. And he had them jump up and down just a little bit like this. And they were totally out of breath. That really impacted the senators. And that legislation was passed. Do you know, I doubt whether that legislation would even get heard today in the Congress. So many members of Congress are indentured to the powers of these corporate interests. So many good members of Congress have retired and are no longer there. Just think of the ravages of the coal industry, absentee-owned in New York, Pittsburgh, Chicago, and London for decades and decades. They didn't pay a fraction of the property tax over their valuable coal lands, depriving schools here in West Virginia and Appalachia of important dollars for the school children, not to mention other municipal services. They destroyed hundreds of square miles of areas. They hollowed out areas where houses and even part of the Pennsylvania Turnpike is now caving in because of subsidence of the coal miners' coal industry's ravages. They destroyed more coal miners through black lung disease and through coal mine accidents in the last 110 years than all the Americans killed in World War II. More coal miners have died in the last 110 years than all the Americans killed in World War II. And I might say that those laws that were passed did have an effect. Ken Heckler just told me there hasn't been a major coal mine collapse since the 1969 Coal Mine Safety Act was passed. Regulation works when it's honestly enforced and fairly enforced. Not like today, where we have health and safety regulatory agencies that sell out to the auto industry, the food industry, the drug industry, the aviation industry, you name it. They are captives of these giant corporate interests. And our politicians are increasingly characterized by their cowardliness. Cowardliness to a level that almost would stun a psychological profile. These are politicians who think more of their short-range re-election prospects by getting money to get reelected than of the short and long-range rights and humanitarian improvement of the American people, who should be the ones they should try to get to reelect them. Not to go for the money fat cats first and then put 30-second ads on TV to try to mislead people. After the coal industry's done this to Appalachia, now we have another prominent problem, which is mountaintop removal. Mountaintop removal, for those of you who haven't gone through Appalachia, is a staggering declaration of coal industry war against the people of Appalachia in those communities who are devastated by the dynamite explosions, the destruction of the forests, the burial or contamination of their streams. Mountaintop removal is a problem throughout Appalachia. The forests in southern West Virginia, where mountaintop removal is the dominant form of strip mining, and have been the most productive and diverse temperate forests in the world. And this mountaintop dynamite destroys tens of square miles by blowing holes in the forest canopy, leaving forests, streams, and local communities destroyed forever. Mountaintop removal mines could not exist without big and expensive machines. This capital-intensive form of mining replaces workers with machines. And guess what? They were brought here to West Virginia by the coal industry after the coal industry lobbied the state government to give tax credits, in other words, checks from the state treasury to these absentee coal industry barons as a condition for bringing these big machines in. There would be more jobs today for workers in West Virginia and throughout Appalachia. If mining had to be done in a more responsible manner. Additionally, until now, reclamation of these mines has been abysmal, and proper reclamation, according to the requirements of existing law, federal law, would create many mining jobs. What is the position of Albert Gore running for the presidency on this issue? He has been silent. He's talked a lot recently about environment at a level of such generality that even philosophers could only marvel at. Of course, George W. Bush, one doesn't even have to ask about George W. Bush. He is basically a Bush corporation running for president. He would never challenge King Coal, King Oil, King Nuclear, or King Gas. But George W. Bush is, of course, held to lower standards of performance than Albert Gore. And I call on Albert Gore to come to West Virginia and take a stand, as I have taken, not only for more labor-intensive reclamation and prudent mining, but to end once and for all the mountaintop removals that are destroying forever the communities and heritage and environment and streams of this once so beautiful state. I'm running for president because the only way we are going to regain control of our political institutions is to help build a progressive political movement in this country that will break up the concentration of wealth and power in too few hands. This is a country now where the supremacy of corporate power and corporate interests reigns over the supremacy of the people. That is not what was envisioned by our founding fathers, by our Constitution, by Thomas Jefferson and John Adams and James Madison and Abraham Lincoln and Theodore Roosevelt and Franklin Delano Roosevelt and Supreme Court Justice Louis Brandeis or Supreme Court Justice William O. Douglas. These are just some of the leading Americans of our past who have again and again warned us that we cannot have a democratic society with a society dominated by the few over the many, with a concentration of wealth and power in too few hands. I might add, not only the moneyed interest wealth and power, but the people's wealth and power is now taken from them. Trillions of dollars of worker pension funds are not controlled by the workers who own that money. Those funds are invested in major corporations by the big employers like General Electric or IBM, who are already undermining the pension rights of workers who've been there for 30 years. These monies are invested by the banks and insurance companies. These corporations control the trillions of dollars that the workers own. And if the workers could be given the authority through intermediate mechanisms to control the investment of these pension monies, they could control a good deal of these corporations through their capital investments. And I think that this campaign has got to try to get the other two party candidates to start paying attention to what the people of this country own as a commonwealth. The pension funds, they own the public lands, 1/3 of America, where the oil and gas and molybdenum and gold and other companies control and pillage and profit from and pay very little back to the taxpayer or the government. We own the public airways. The public airways are owned by the people of this country legally. We're the landlords. The radio and TV stations are the tenants. They don't pay us any rent, and they decide who says what 24 hours a day on our own public airways. Is it too much for the people who own the trillions of dollars of pension funds, the American workers, to control those funds and shape a better society rather than give this enormous capital fund into the concentrated power hands of global corporations who have no allegiance to this country anymore, no allegiance to any community other than to control them? Is it too much to ask us to control the public lands, where foreign and domestic companies can go on our public lands under the 1872 Mining Act, discover gold, copper, silver, molybdenum, and then pay our Department of Interior $5 an acre to own these enormously wealthy reserves of minerals. A Canadian company a few years ago discovered $9 billion, it's their figure, of gold on our land in Nevada, public land. And under the 1872 Mining Act, all they had to do to own this gold was to decide how many acres they wanted to buy from the Department of Interior. They went to the Department of Interior, they said, these are the acres we want, and the Department of Interior had to sell it for $30,000. $5 an acre, your gold. $9 billion of gold will be sold by this corporation, a Canadian company, without any profit sharing back to the government, any royalties back to the people. Is it too much to ask for a change? Is it too much to ask George W. Bush and Albert Gore to discuss the need to apply law and order against corporate crime, fraud, and abuse that's stealing and deceiving consumers and depleting family budgets, from the insurance industry to the financial industry, the banks, to the healthcare industry, to the auto dealer and auto company industry? It amounts to hundreds of billions of dollars a year. In fact, Money Magazine, a few years ago, a magazine owned by Time Warner, not exactly a left-wing periodical, estimated that if the state insurance commissioners enforced the state laws on health and auto and other insurance, they would save consumers $60 billion a year. You are paying over $100 billion a year just because of computerized billing fraud and abuse in the healthcare industry, the hospitals, the HMOs, the big chains, those computerized bills that you can't figure out because they're in code. You're paying tens of billions of dollars for payday loan and rent-to-own rackets that are exploiting low-income people in this country with horrendous interest rates, 200, 300, 400% interest rates. You are paying much of the money you earn in the office and the factory. You are paying to these corporate crooks and criminals. And it's time for the honest businesses to side with the consumer groups and realize that if law and order is not applied with adequate prosecution budgets and adequate rights of consumers who are ripped off or who are wrongfully harmed to have their full access to the civil justice system so that the jury and the judge and the appellate courts can make the decisions, not absentee legislators at the state and federal level greased by corporate cash, restricting and tying the hands of our judges and juries. Is it too much to ask Mr. Bush and Mr. Gore to stand up in a modest profile of courage and ask, if law and order is appropriate for the streets, why isn't it appropriate for the corporate suites? If there's to be welfare reform for the poor, what about welfare reform for the rich, which is far, far bigger drain on taxpayer dollars? I was in Birmingham, Alabama the other day, and there was in the newspaper, the school district is running out of money. Before the end of the year, had to borrow $20 million, lay off 200 teachers. And yet, in the same newspaper, there is a reference to a gleaming $300 million stadium built by tax money. Where is it going? Where should tax money go? All over the country, we are running with citizen groups who are fighting incinerators to protect the health of their children in southeast Ohio, who are fighting stadiums and baseball parks that are leaching tax money from neighborhood repair and from the services that real people need, instead of mega billion-dollar sports complexes who should use their own money for their own stadiums and arenas. We are fighting with groups in Southern California who are trying to get expanded mass transit so that the dominant clogged highway system doesn't destroy the quality of life and take away so many billions of hours of commuter time, day in and day out. We are siding with people who are supporting affordable housing and decent homeless shelters, such as in downtown Atlanta, where the homeless shelter is being criticized by the business establishment. I hope Ted Turner will do something about that. But you know, the business establishment, they don't like to see visible homeless people in the downtown area. This is a very nice homeless shelter for 500 homeless people. It's very well run. And yet somehow, in its 2 years of existence, it can't get a kitchen permit from the city of Atlanta. How strange. Can't even get a kitchen permit. There are all kinds of polluters who are getting all kinds of permits, aren't there, all over the country. But a shelter in Atlanta, Georgia can't get a kitchen permit to feed the homeless. We are running with groups who are fighting for consumer crackdowns on the pillage of the poor. Those of you who have not experienced what low-income people are going through in terms of check-cashing outlets and all of these consumer rackets with these incredibly high interest rates that would be illegal in the 1970s, but they repealed the usury laws, so it's no longer illegal. There's no law and order here. We have good laws at the state, federal, national level to put boundaries around corporate greed and corporate violations. They're not being enforced. In fact, next time a politician is asked about crime, you should ask the politician, do you mean street crime or do you mean corporate crime? Never let the politicians forget that. When they talk about the need to preserve and balance the budget, ask them why the budgets are busted by a vast expanded military budget, by huge subsidies to these giant agribusiness and mining companies, by the giveaway of the pharmaceuticals that your tax dollar developed, like AZT and Taxol and many others, to the drug companies under monopoly marketing agreements that our government gives away. Why? Why does a woman with ovarian cancer write us over a year ago and say that she went to her doctor and her doctor said it was an advanced stage and all he could recommend was Taxol, but it cost about $14,000 for a series of treatments. She didn't know at the time, having lost her $19,000 a year job, that Taxol was discovered, developed, tested with $31 million of our tax money under the National Institutes of Health in Bethesda, Maryland, and given away under a monopoly marketing agreement to Bristol Myers Squibb, who's allowed to charge whatever they could get away with, and on their burgeoning profits arising out of the $1 billion this year, which they will make in revenues from Taxol, none of it goes back to the taxpayers for further research and development. Let me note that our country is full of problems that it doesn't deserve and full of solutions that aren't applied. That spells something we call the democracy gap. When democracy is not strong, bad things happen. When democracies are strong, good things happen. When we get a strong democracy, a deep democracy, we will never again have the top 1% of the wealthiest people in this country have wealth equal to the combined 95% of the American people. Does anybody really believe that the 95% of the American people make less of an economic contribution to our economy than the top 1%? There are 120 million Americans in this country, the poorest of them, whose combined wealth is about equal to the wealth of Bill Gates of Microsoft. And whatever that says about the great software imitator, what does it say about millions of Americans who work every year, year after year, decade after decade, and are essentially broke? It says that the system is out of balance, that the few are grabbing off more and more and more from the many. It says that we have to organize as citizens to put our democracy back into balance. It says we have to spend more of our time as citizens every month in addition to our work and our families and our recreation. We have to be, as David Grubb pointed out, public citizens. And for those of you who want to volunteer in our campaign, and for those of you who want to make financial contributions to it, our website is votenader.com or votenader.org, either one. And you'll be able to see how the campaign is developing, how more and more people are coming into it, what wonderful candidates from California to Maine are joining the Green Party and running for state, local, and national office. Here in West Virginia, there is a petition drive, which is very important for people to join, so you'll have broader choice on the ballot in November. Let me just leave you with a historical perspective and a future perspective very briefly. If you think that our country cannot be dramatically improved with long-tested solutions, whether it's to make products safer, services better, more available, whether it's to clean up the environment, whether it's to abolish poverty, as essentially some Western nations already have, such as Scandinavia and the Netherlands, whether it's never again to have the scar of 20% of our children growing up in poverty, whether it's to avoid the enormous indebtedness of the American people, which now is over $6 trillion because 2 incomes per family can hardly make ends meet, whether it's to develop a government that serves the people rather than serves big corporations, whether it's a society where the corporations are the servants of the people, as the original early 19th century lawmakers envisioned them to be, rather than the masters of the people. To do all this, we need to build a progressive political party that can be built very quickly. It takes about 1 million Americans pledging 100 hours a year, raising $100 a year behind the Green Party with its wonderful agenda that you'll be able to see all over the country in the coming months, to make a successful progressive political party that first begins to leverage the other 2 parties, basically saying to them that if they don't shape up, they're going to have to ship out. And after that, to begin winning more and more seats at the state, local, and national level. Remember the farmers in East Texas when they were being squeezed by the railroads and the banks in 1887. What did they do? Did they just give up? They started the greatest populist progressive reform movement in American history, sweeping east, north, west, all over the country over the next 25 years. And they were up overwhelming odds against them. What about those Americans who wanted to abolish slavery? And how lonely it was, and how they persisted and persisted. What courage. What about the Americans who were part of the sit-down strikes in the auto and steel industries, where they couldn't get a decent living in dangerous working conditions? And they formed the United Auto Workers and the U.S. Steel Workers, and in the mines, United Mine Workers. That was a lonely fight, too. And the women's fight to get their vote, and that took 60 years or so. That was a pretty lonely fight. There was a lot of opposition. You know what characterizes all these social justice movements? One, the dominant business community was against them year after year and opposed them. Two, enough Americans said enough is enough and we're not going to take it anymore and we're going to build a more just society for ourselves and the rest of our country. And three, they won. And the business community lost, and our country was better off as a result. And indeed, the markets expanded even for these corporations. And in our century, in the 20th century, we see also these great movements that were opposed by the dominant business community. The environmental movement opposed by the coal industry, and the textile industry, and the steel industry, and the auto industry. And they lost some of those oppositions, and the people won, and we have some improvement. There's less lead in the air, less hydrocarbons. Some of the streams or rivers are cleaner, and there's going to be more progress. And the same for the consumer movement. When I fought the auto companies, can you imagine? They fought us for years not to put seat belts in cars when they were putting World War I airplanes And they didn't put them in cars until 1966 as standard equipment. They refused to put padded dash panels and collapsible steering columns, all invented before World War I. That's how stubborn they are. And that teaches us that we always have to put these commercial juggernauts, these commercial interests, under the law and order umbrella. That unless they are countervailed by strong trade unions with strong labor laws, including the repeal of Taft-Hartley, unless they're countervailed by environmental groups and citizen groups and consumer groups and strong regulation fairly applied, these commercial interests will plunder and pillage and violate most of the traditional value systems. That's the history of the world. That's why every major religion warned us about giving excessive power to the commercial or merchant interests. And now the power is in the hands not of the local merchant or the small business, they're in the hands of these global corporations that command labor, capital, control governments, set up international autocratic systems like the World Trade Organization or NAFTA to undermine our democratic processes. More information on this, for those of you who want to follow up, are on our website, votenader.com. And you'll be able to contribute your ideas, contribute your funds, contribute your time. We want you to contribute time, volunteer time, to show the vested interests that citizen time can overcome big money bucks in politics. You know, for those of you who haven't been to Appalachia, maybe you want to see what mountaintop removal is like. Here it is, Raising Appalachia. This is an example of what these giant coal companies do to America, or what other companies have done to poison our land and our rivers and our aquifers, and to in many ways destroy the very sustainability of our natural environment. Let me conclude on this note. It's time for the debate commission that is controlled by the Republican and Democratic parties, the Presidential Debate Commission, to open up to third-party candidates so those debates with Albert Gore and George Bush not put the American people to sleep. And I hope that you will contact Vice President Gore and Governor of Texas, George W. Bush, one in Washington, one in Austin, Texas, and say that you want more choice, you want a vibrant debate, you want debate on important subjects that are going to be ignored by these candidates. Because the American people overwhelmingly want fair consumer protection laws to protect their family budget and their health and safety. They want universal health insurance. They want public financing of public campaigns. They don't want their tax dollars to go to make rich corporations richer for frivolous uses. They want the companies to pay their fair share of taxes, local, state, and national, and they're getting away without paying their fair share of taxes. They want clean environments. Whether they put the label conservative, liberal, or progressive on their lapels or on their hats, they all want the same thing for their children. And they want their children to grow up learning how to be upstanding citizens, learning how to practice democracy, how to be citizens who know how to control their government and control the large corporations. They don't just want schools that are properly repaired or teachers properly paid. They want their youngsters to grow up knowing the history of this country, knowing what they have to do to make a happier and more just society. I want to leave you with this thought, namely, that in many areas of our country, we have successful pilot projects. You can see it. There are inner city schools that are very wonderfully managed compared to many others that aren't, where the students are learning, the parents are involved, the teachers are motivated. We have companies like the Interface Corporation in Atlanta that's leading the world in pollution control systems and recycling for its large commercial carpet and commercial tile manufacturing system. We have all kinds of examples, many of them in this book called Natural Capitalism by Paul Hawken and the Lovenses that's just out, if those of you who want to see what the solutions are like. We have countries growing industrial hemp to produce all kinds of products, but we can't grow it in this country. We can only import it for clothing and paper and medicines and lubricants, this wonderful 5,000-year-old plant that George Washington and Thomas Jefferson grew. We need to allow the farmers to grow that plant. We see the American people are way ahead of the politicians, but the politicians are under the yoke of big business. And unless the American people lift that yoke, the politicians will not reflect the interests of the American people. They will only reflect the agenda of concentrated corporate power. I hope that you will contact us on the website, votenader.com, and stay in touch with us. Our phone number in Washington is 202-465-2000. And those of you who want to help on the petition drives in the states such as North Carolina, Texas, Oklahoma, Georgia, Illinois, Indiana, Michigan, and West Virginia, roll up your sleeves and help with the petition drives so we can be on all 50 states. And we will show, we the American people, all of us, will show just what this country can be like here and what it reflects to the world all over the continents of our globe. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. You can have a few questions. Yes, 2-3 questions. Thank you. We have just a few questions because we are running out of time, but I do want to elicit some questions or comments from the audience. Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. Okay. Yes, there are. Not only do other countries have universal health insurance, they're way advanced in maternity leaves, in child care of all kinds, health care, daycare. France, for example, Germany, Canada, Scandinavia, Belgium. In some areas, such as Germany, they're way ahead of us in recycling materials to preserve important natural resources and reduce pollution. There are many things we can learn from other countries. Other countries can learn from us. But we should have our country known not for the amount of landmines, jet planes, and tanks that our corporations are selling with taxpayer subsidies to dictators overseas who may use them against our own military personnel someday, but known for exporting democratic processes and solutions such as solar energy and other ways that have worked that other countries, especially in the third world, desperately need. Another? Yes, ma'am.
How in the world are you going to get the media and the Congress to work with you when it's dead against everything?
If a progressive candidate for president gets elected, it can only happen because of a widespread mobilization and popular mandate by committed citizens. And the Congress is full of people who put their finger to the wind. So let's give them some wind. Can we have just one more, please? Yes. Oh, I'm sorry, I did give the wrong phone number. It's 202. How did that happen? 202-265-4000 is the phone number of the campaign office in Washington. And those of you who are interested in contacting us can use that number. But much easier is votenader.com, the website. We have another question, please? Just quickly. Someone else?
What is your stand on international relations?
We have to have a framework of foreign policy where we move rapidly, for military arms reduction. We've got a great opportunity now with Russia to cut back dramatically on nuclear weapons. We've got to begin launching a major foreign policy effort against global infectious diseases that are debilitating millions of people and destroying the lives of many children, like tuberculosis and malaria and AIDS, many of which are coming to this country in drug-resistant form. And I think what we need to do is expand our educational efforts all over the world in order to elicit more democratic forces in these countries and bring out the genius of these countries and the people. I could show you great ways for affordable housing in poor countries have been developed by architects in those countries, or great ways to advance literacy in a few weeks by Paulo Freire in Brazil when he was active. And of course the microcredit efforts to women entrepreneurs in Bangladesh from the Grameen Bank. We've got to talk much more about that. Yes.
What about sanctions on Cuba and Iraq? Do you think that it would be better off just to lift those?
Well, I don't think a policy that sacrifices the children in a dictatorship to destabilize a dictator always fails. You actually strengthen the repressive forces in these countries, and to sacrifice children by not providing adequate entry of medicine, food, by destroying drinking water systems, through the destruction of electricity power plants, is destructive and unworthy of our country. I think we have to leave now because of the airport. Thank you very much for coming.